Hello. Hi, Sun Valley Forum participants. It's nice to be with you all today, wherever you are. I'm Kristin Coates, and I'm here with you from Telluride, Colorado. And I'm going to be your moderator for the next hour as we discuss the future of food. We are still waiting on one panelist, so hopefully he'll pop in any minute. But in the meantime, I'll go ahead with my introductions. So I think it's safe to assume that for the past few months, it's been like no other for all of us. My constant refrain has been in making plans. I just say, let's just see what happens, which is why today's conversations makes me really excited, because we're talking about actually shaping, defining, and designing the future of our food system. So we're looking at a food system that's accessible, nutritious, equitable, and regenerative. So I'm glad you're here so we can go on this journey together. And just a little bit about me. My deep connection to the food system started as a teenager when I took a summer job as a farmer in New York. And the hot days and the early mornings woke me up to the labor and the love of the land, but it also helped me understand that you don't simply pull lettuce from the earth and get them to consumers. There's so many stakeholders involved and so many steps involved. And it made me think about how complicated it is on a larger scale of importing and exporting food, getting it to urban areas, and so many other areas of focus. So today, I'm fortunate enough to be Senior Director at SecondMuse. We're an innovation company that works with visionary corporations, cities, governments, organizations, and startups to create 21st century economies. And for the past year, we have had the great privilege of working with the Food System Vision Prize and Rockefeller Foundation and the design and implementation of the prize. You're going to hear more about that in just a minute. So let's get started. I'm going to turn the mic over to each of the panelists and ask them to take 3 minutes to introduce themselves and share where your love of the food sector started. We'll then get into one big juicy question with so many panelists. We have time for one. So here we go. And pardon me, but one of our other panelists is calling me, so I'm going to mute myself and talk to Ron while you all introduce yourselves. Thanks.
Well, I'm happy to kick it off. My name's Sara Farley, and I'm the Managing Director at the Rockefeller Foundation of the food team. My connection to food and agriculture is sort of twofold. My mom grew up on a farm. My grandpa was a farmer in Arizona. Worked hard and hard everywhere. And so I always had an affinity and an interest, a curiosity, really. And then I got my professional start in international development, focused on science, technology, and innovation. And the more I followed the storylines of innovation and technology, so many pathways led back to food and agriculture. One, because it's just the majority of human beings on this planet elicit their incomes and their livelihood through the land, through being a farmer. And so it matters that we get it right. And I think once I figured that out, I was hooked. I'll pass the mic.
So I'm happy to go next. I know Ron is trying to join in and he'll slide in when he gets on, but my name's Lila. I'm a partner at an investment firm called Generation. We are based in London with an office in San Francisco. I'm actually sitting in Sun Valley right now, enjoying a beautiful day of rain, of which we're all very thankful for. And my day job is to co-head our private equity strategy. Here, we're really looking to accelerate the transition to a more sustainable economy through investing in growth companies. So we invest check sizes of around 50 to 150 million. And the three pillars that we focus on would include planetary health, people health, and financial inclusion. And in fact, kind of food, sits squarely in planetary health, but equally can be often viewed from the people health language and from the perspective of broadening access and affordability. And so my passion for food comes from 15 years of researching this space from an investment perspective, but also back, earlier in my life, I, despite growing up in a city, have spent a lot of time out here in Idaho. Worked on a cattle ranch when I was 16, spent a lot of time working on ranches all through high school, and found myself in rural Chile doing forestry and economic development right out of college. And so I'd say food and ecosystem services, forestry, and the bioeconomy are all near and dear to my heart. So I'll pass over to Daniel.
Great. Thank you, Lila. Hi, good afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you may be. I'm Daniel Moss. I'm the Executive Director of the AgroEcology Fund, and I'm speaking to you from Vermont, from Guilford, Vermont. And my story about getting into food is that as a kind of adventurous, curious lad in my 20s, I went to go volunteer and work in El Salvador during the Civil War. In the Salvadoran Civil War, like so many of the civil wars in throughout Central America, really had at their core land reform. So these were largely peasant-led struggles to try to secure land for able to support their families. So I really got a sense, it really drew me in, this kind of critical issue about land tenure and land control, access to water and soil as a means of livelihood, as a means of health. I worked on a farm for the next 4 years as a volunteer, and what I was really struck by is, these were folks that had been refugees during the Civil War, and they came back into the country from Honduras, and they started farming. And they actually, this is back in 1989, 1990, they were actually through support from foundations, they purchased pesticides and chemical fertilizers. Fast forward to today, their kidney failure is off the charts, and chemical poisoning has been part of their history for the last few decades. So I was very aware of the kind of risks that they're taking to feed their families and how important it is to move into a more natural farming. And then the third thing I think that drew me in is accompanying these farmers to markets. I remember going to San Miguel, the market in El Salvador, and going with them as they tried to sell their produce, and how locked out of the local markets they were. At that point, even then, we're much more globalized now, but even then, their markets were inundated with imports. And so after I left El Salvador, I went to get my master's degree, and I did a thesis on the wholesale market in San Salvador called La Tiendona. And I actually saw a success story that really inspired me, a success story where tomato growers from the Department of Chalatenango were able to sell their local, healthy, kind of indigenous tomatoes in the wholesale market, competing with imports, because they were core to the salsa, the sauce for the pupusa, which is like a national food. So it was kind of this great story of this recapture of local diet and the necessity to use this really juicy Salvadoran tomato. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Love each of your stories. I'm sorry I missed some of yours, Sarah, but fortunately I get to work with Sarah, so I know some of it. Thanks for self-moderating. Ron should be joining us any minute, but I'm going to go ahead and jump into this very juicy question because there's two parts to it. So the first part, we're just taking a broad view, recognizing that the food system is it's vast, it's multi-layered, and involves many stakeholders, from growers to distributors to policymakers, innovators, consumers. So as an organization, please share with us your focus and why you deem this particular approach or this particular focus as being most imperative to shaping a better food future. And just to maybe say a little bit about what you're tackling today and what you're envisioning, again, for the food future. Second part of the question, just to put a twist on it, is recognizing that we've all experienced a big change over the past few months. COVID has really demonstrated that there's a lot of fragmentation and a lot of fragility in our food system. So also curious to how COVID has shifted your work and how it will shift your work as you think about the future of food and the approach you're taking. So it's a juicy one. Do you have a part? Okay. So Sarah, let's start with you again. And if Ron steps in, I might ask that you finish your section, and then we'll do an introduction with Ron and let him repeat the question and let him jump in. And you have about 7 or 8 minutes to answer. So please jump in.
Thanks so much, Kristin. And it's a whopper of a question, and I'll do my best to work through it. So at the Rockefeller Foundation, we are starting from the premise that the food system that we have today is failing us. Diet-related disease is the #1 cause of death. Greenhouse gas emissions from the food and agriculture enterprise are bigger than those from any other sector. We have a system that is neither just nor equitable for the vast number of billions of people who depend on it for their livelihood. If we, double click just on the hunger dimension, we have 2 billion people on the planet who are not getting the sufficient nutrients and calories to qualify or quantify as really having a nourishing diet. And then if we put COVID into the picture, we know already since March, more than 100 million people have slipped into what is defined as acute hunger. So this is desperate, life-threatening situation. So that's the negative. If you turn it, we also know that the food system can be a source, a fundamental source for the renewing of human health. Food is medicine, as Dr. Mark Hyman reminds us. Similarly, we can create a food system that not only sustains the planet, but regenerates the environment. And we absolutely, I love, Daniel, your stories of inequity and in access in El Salvador and the hope it gave you to see what happens when those opportunities open. We can absolutely create a food system that does enable more equitable opportunity, access, and dignity for the people that depend upon it. So the way we're going about this as a foundation, one, and this is I think a real differentiator from where Rockefeller was in the recent past, let alone in our 105-year history, we are intentionally taking a food systems approach. This means we don't get to just look at diet over here and sort of fail to recognize the planetary health dimensions, nor do we just look at livelihoods and not think about equity and regulation and policy and culture and all of these other dimensions. It means we're attempting to look at the totality, the intersectionality, the linkages, and the feedback loops of the food system writ large. So the way we're biting off bites, manageable bites from that incredibly complex starting point is we're really looking at 3 intervention areas, leverage points, you could say, in the food system. 1 is transformative food policy. 2 is a renewed focus on food systems infrastructure. So there we're really thinking about supply chains. And 3rd, especially in light of COVID, focusing on children and families just getting access to the food they need, not just food security, but nutrition security. So within those 3 buckets, my particular focus is really on the global portfolio, which I run. And so I'm really interested in the transformative food policy opportunities. Kristin mentioned the Food System Vision Prize, which is one of, I think, just our most exciting initiatives. And to unpack that a little bit for those that might not be familiar with it, depending upon what you read and where you go, you're looking at data sets that range from dismal to utterly and completely depressing when it comes to telling us what the future is likely to be in food and agriculture. We are really good at the dystopia and frankly not articulate when it comes to what is the future we want to have occur and manifest for our food systems, not the global food system, but our local food systems. What does that look like? So recognizing that sort of void, we put forward an invitation. And it was an invitation to any food system stakeholder anywhere. It could be a chef, a farmer, an investor, a policymaker, a researcher, and indeed all of those archetypes responded and in collaboration together, which was awesome. What is your 2050 food system vision that is nourishing, regenerative, equitable, and sustainable? We thought we'd get a few. We're hoping our internal goal was 500. We thought we'd get hoped for 500. We got 1,300 unique submissions of food system visions for the year 2050 from 199 countries. So there was this pent-up demand to articulate visions for the future. And inside of them, we've seen such extraordinary bounties of innovations. We'll be coming forward with a data report that really articulates this in the next couple of months. But to your question, Kristin, of what might this mean for like our 10-year vision? If these visions are to come to life as they're presented in the visions, I think what we're talking about is one, a real shift in diet quality globally. I would go so far as to say we would probably see a doubling of diet quality in key geographic areas, higher consumption of healthy foods, lower consumption of unhealthy foods. I think we'd see shifts in subsidies to really start to take a serious attempt to scale regenerative, not dally and dabble in it, but scale it as a dominant agricultural practice and approach. I think we'd also see the lowering of the average age of farmers. Farmers are aging out in the United States just as much as they are in Africa. And I think if this really becomes a more thriving and lucrative and honored profession, people are going to want to do it. And so we'd see the average age decrease. Those are just a few of the 10-year goals that we feel we're fighting for. But one of the things I'll say to your point about COVID and that second dimension of your question, Kristin, is that we started the Food System Vision Prize before COVID, was on anybody's radar. And what's been really heartening is the teams, even in absence of yet knowing who the 10 finalists are going to be, which are announced next week. So stay tuned. The teams are coming forward and saying, in this moment where our food systems so clearly are rupturing, the latent failures within them are being laid bare, we've already taken steps for months to think about how we could reimagine a better system. So these teams are plugging in Nigeria. We have teams that have put forward 6 pieces of federal policy and are putting them forward to their parliament. In Puerto Rico, they're working with a economics, health, and agriculture team to make this part of the Puerto Rican 2050 vision. In India, we had an applicant group pivot and actually start a producer business organization and get food that was trapped with Maharashtrian farmers, liberate it and get it out into urban areas underserved with nourishing food. So this scaffolding, this infrastructure of visionaries globally that just needed to be given, I think, a light platform to really make themselves more visible. They're really doing something to mobilize and build a movement in this moment, and that's been incredibly gratifying. Beyond the Vision Prize, a lot is changing for us at the foundation. We are really trying to grapple with the food distribution challenge in the United States, in particular, getting replacement essentially for the provision of school meals is incredibly important work. We're right now getting to 3 million meals distributed a week through Rockefeller support, working with groups like United Way, World Central Kitchen, and others. In Africa, the play is really about trying to create a pan-African food security plan that unifies real clear data on the availability, the actual food balance sheet. What do we have? What are we growing in field right now using satellite data, so that instead of fear potentially driving trade closures and other challenges for the market, finding ways to create a space for policymakers to really use real-time data to support not only the maintaining of their markets, but the maintaining of their trade. That also couples with an initiative that we're calling a smart market play. We're working with designers and policymakers in Africa to reimagine what food markets, informal markets, could look like right now during COVID that would have vastly higher food safety availability, as well as secure energy provision, which has been a real challenge when it comes to cold storage and maintaining not only food safety, but the ability to have distribution further down the supply chain. So a lot of exciting work. I'll close the last piece that, again, we didn't know how these pieces would all fit together pre-COVID, but next year is just a watershed moment for folks that care about food systems with the first ever United Nations Food Systems Summit. And we believe, because of COVID, because of lockdown, where we're all digesting information like this, if we're lucky enough to have internet access, we are sitting in front of our screens, maybe in a bedroom or in a home office. That gives us an opportunity to make a space like a summit radically more collaborative, radically more accessible and democratized. And so what we're looking to do is really inject a few concrete offerings into the Food Systems Summit so that people, anyone, anywhere who wants to help shape their food system can find a space to articulate how to build back better in their food system. What are the policies? What are the innovations? How does their action agenda in Sierra Leone connect to that in Burkina Faso, connect to that in Idaho or Iowa? So we're looking to do more of that kind of work with SecondMuse and other key partners in the months to come. But that'll be another part of our response to the COVID challenge. I'll pass it along.
Thank you for that, Sarah. And just a little shameless plug in terms of the Food System Vision Prize. if you have a little time on your hands, do check out the website for foodsystemvisionprize.org. It's so inspiring to see what these different visionaries have come up with from across the globe and this systems approach. And even for those who are just food curious, not food experts, it's an incredible learning of, what is possible. So just a little shameless plug there. Thank you, Sara. So next we will go to Lila, and she'll give us a different perspective from the standpoint of an investor. Thanks, Lila.
Okay. I love that, actually picking up on the systems view, that despite being on the investment side, this is how we approach all of our research and the way in which we underpin kind of our investment development is to take this 360-degree view, and in particular related to food and agriculture. That's a journey that we're in, year 16 of actually very, very early on in Generation's inception. We started laying down these roadmaps. We have several hundred of them across the firm, probably, a dozen in food and agriculture. And they would range from deep dives into pockets of the market, including precision agriculture, including urban food systems, alternative protein. I think we're on our third version, biologicals, again, third version, supply chain traceability, soil health, last mile delivery, food waste reduction, sort of all these deep dives that we do over the years to understand a trend or a theme or an opportunity set, and equally understand sort of the risks and the challenges, what's holding back technology deployment, what's advancing or accelerating it. And then where in a value chain are we best positioned to play a role as providers of capital. We also do have a lot of advocacy work that we do as a firm, both through our foundation and then through proving the business case for sustainable investing, given that's all that we do is dedicated sustainability investing across big companies and small companies. I would say through the years of road mapping, and probably back in 2015, we crystallized one of the frameworks that we've used actually to organize our work in food and ag. And that's what we called the Tug of War. Actually, my colleague Vivian coined this, but it was this tug of war that we saw in mass mainstream food of a challenge between sustainability, affordability, nutrition, and taste. And effectively, our entire formalized food system has had those trade-offs. So it has optimized taste, it has optimized affordability, but not necessarily at the maximum of nutrition or sustainability. And even as new technologies or innovative kind of new food concepts have come through, for example, like insect protein might optimize on nutrition and sustainability, but perhaps fall short on price, on taste or price. Or you might have organic revolution where people are optimizing for sustainability, but there's trade-offs with resource intensity and price. And so we've always kind of thought through this tug of war, and that is something that we found helpful in assessing kind of some of these new business models. I would say it's made us actually quite optimistic in this moment, thinking 10 years forward, to say that for the first time, I actually see business models coming through that can reconcile the tensions between sustainability, affordability, nutrition, and taste. I actually think that whether it's plant-based formulations, the power of fermentation, whether it's the kind of the nutrition elements embedded into lower cost food and delivery platforms, I do think that this time is different. And I would say that actually COVID is probably, in this moment in time, which is so difficult for our food supply chains, is actually probably the point in time where we will see more momentum towards a more resilient, distributed, nutritious food system, because it has to be. I would say, one of the active areas for us has been on kind of the non-land or animal protein front. So I think I mentioned fermentation. We have a company called Nature's Find, which we've been involved with, which actually during the pandemic, more and more people are interested in foods that come from non-land-based or non-manufacturing and kind of industrial production. I think that people want to know where their food is coming from. I think they want to know that it's made safely, that it has a lower environmental footprint. And ultimately, I think we have to be able to get the cost down. I mean, I think ultimately we have to get nutrition more affordable, and that touches on many things that Sara spoke about. We've also, hope that 10 years in the future, we'll see this moment in the time as a transition to, personalized foods where people understand the connection that they have to their food system. One of the quotes that I always thought was fascinating back from probably like 2014 or so was Bruce German, who's head of the Foods for Health Institute at UC Davis, who said, most of the consumer product categories, from transportation to communications, from finance to entertainment, are already global, digital, and personal. In contrast, food remains a low-tech and impersonal market. Now, I feel like that was true in 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. And these are like the first moments in time, not because we expected a global pandemic, but I do believe we're starting to see a shift towards more, adopting technology for good, and then more personalization of the food system. So that's kind of what I believe is kind of shifting. And I'm not Pollyannish to say that we're there yet. There's a lot of work to do. But I'm probably more optimistic today than I was even 6 months ago.
Thank you for that. Yeah, lots to think about, and also thinking about these alternative proteins. I mean, it's still, in some ways, it feels like it's a trend, and in other ways, it feels like it's a movement burgeoning to happen. So I'd love to dig into that one for sure. Thanks for that. Daniel, please.
Okay. Well, thanks. Boy, what inspiring. I want to catch up with each of you and plumb your minds to get some context, especially Sara, the work that it sounds very similar, that we're equally inspired by this incredible mosaic of, exciting alternative food organizations, companies, visions that are, remaking our food system. So it's a really innovative time. So I work, again, I'm Daniel Moss. I work with the AgroEcology Fund, and we formed the AgroEcology Fund with a similar observation that you mentioned in the prompt question, Kristin, about multiple layers and stakeholders. At the AgroEcology Fund, we call this kind of loose coalition of actors working together to transform the food system into something